Welcome to another edition of Forecast Lab, a powerful weather system on the East Coast. Heavy lake effect snows are on the way in the Great Lakes, and the Pacific getting active once again. You can see out there on the Goes West imagery, they are starting to line up out there. There is a sneak peek what's going on out there in the Pacific. Warm front somewhere right here just west of San Francisco, cold front extending southwest, and an occluded front going further up to the north. The next one just out to the west, we're going to be seeing that come on shore around Friday or Saturday. And you can watch the progression over the next several days, Thursday and Friday. And this should bring some very strong precipitation and high winds to parts of Northern California, especially along the coast. There's a look at the water vapor imagery. Plenty of moisture on the East Coast. However, this channel does not directly measure moisture. This measures the attenuation of moisture in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere. So right here, there's very little attenuation. That means that there's no moisture present, and there's plenty of radiation coming from there because the temperatures are warm. Further up to the north, we do have a dry air mass. However, there's very little radiation coming from the ground. So although there's no attenuation, there's just not much arriving at the satellite. So even though that appears to be moist, it's actually not. That's actually a very dry air mass. Let me show you the actual precipitable water chart. And you can compare notes there. Yeah, there is 1.5 to 2 inch on the East Coast, but lots of dry air all the way from Minnesota down to the Gulf Coast, ranging from 0.10 inch, extremely dry, to about 0.20 to 0.25 on the Gulf Coast. Just this little sliver of moisture here along the Alberta Clipper Track, about 0.3 from the high plains down to Kansas. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too long-winded. I kind of wanted to get into some educational stuff about how that moisture channel works, the water vapor imagery. Yeah, plenty of cold air up north, below zero. From central Minnesota into North Dakota, much of the Canadian prairies running about -15 to -10. That cold air goes pretty far south. In fact, you go into the Gulf of Mexico. It is pushed all the way into southern Mexico. The winds through that gap, I always forget the name of that gap, but it's right there. That's where the winds kind of funnel and really start blowing. Little mountain pass there, and sometimes that picks up dust and carries a plume out into the Pacific Ocean like that. You can see easterly winds on the central Mexican plateau. Temperatures quite cold, down into the upper 40s at this hour, somewhere north of Guadalajara. I don't know all the cities there, but that easterly flow extends up into Chihuahua. That cold air making it into Florida as well, a very cold, brisk day across northern Florida, and they have frost advisories around the area just west of Jacksonville to Lake City, Gainesville. It's going to be a very cold one tonight, temperatures down to 32. And of course, in the northeastern U.S., we are starting to fire up those lake effect snows once again. Total accumulations looking like this. Now, keep in mind that this is not model data. This is from the National Weather Service Digital Forecast Database. This is what they're using to create the final public forecasts. And you can see some amounts up to 2 feet in the Lake Erie and Ontario snowbelt. This is almost 2.5 to 3 feet from Erie up to just south of Buffalo. Buffalo itself only clocking in with 2 inches. These totals run through early Saturday, and you can see that the snow belts in Lake Michigan, Huron, those are definitely going. And of course, in the UP of Michigan, South Shore lake effect snow is quite heavy, up to almost a foot, 2 feet around Marquette. Let's take a look at the upper air chart. This is the 500 millibar heights and temperatures. Deep low across Ontario, that's the dominant factor for the U.S., bringing this northwesterly flow into the Dakotas and the Midwest, and then rounding the base of that low, heading up into Quebec. So that's the northern stream jet, and we have a Pacific jet as well, coming in like that into California and Oregon. We do have this cutoff low southwest of Southern California, and this next one about to come onshore. And it's a fairly progressive pattern. The upper level low in the western U.S. comes onshore Thursday and starts crossing the Rockies on Friday. And then here comes the second low. We're going to have a powerful weather system there in the Northern California region, while this other low-pressure area transits the northern plains. So just a series of lows and waves making their way into the U.S. from the Pacific, and really we don't have the Arctic opened up, nothing like that. In fact, that low-pressure area in Ontario diminishes. So just kind of a mild pattern in store for the next 10 days. And as we get to the extended period, some ridging starting to show up out there. This is going to be a PNA pattern, the Pacific North American Oscillation. That's a positive phase that's associated with height rises out there in Western Canada with a low height anomaly in Florida. So that dipole right there tells you how we are doing with that PNA phase. So this is a positive phase. And with that, we get an enhanced northwesterly flow into the eastern half of the U.S., and there's another low-pressure area a little bit further south right there in the Great Lakes. So it appears we're going to be back into a cold pattern east of the Rockies for later next week. Yeah, look at that troughing there along the Florida coast. Today is not a nice day in the northeastern U.S. Along the coastal regions, we've got high wind warnings in effect. Those actually go from Long Island to Boston for this afternoon into this evening, and then those start up further up the coast into Maine for tonight. We could have south winds 35 miles an hour gusting to 60 as that coastal low moves to the northeast. Wind advisories further inland, and we actually have flood watches in Vermont and New Hampshire. We're expecting extensive melting of the ground snow cover, which will lead to flooding and swollen rivers. Those problems will extend into parts of New York, south of Plattsburgh, and into western Massachusetts. This will show you the extent of the problems. There is the snow belt for Lake Ontario. They're expecting 2 to 3 feet of snow around Watertown into the Adirondacks. That's from 7 p.m. tonight until 7 p.m. Friday. Could see whiteout conditions, winds up to 40 miles an hour. The Lake Erie snow belt as well. Most of the effects will be south of Buffalo, maybe up to the Finger Lakes. We are expecting 2 to 3 feet of snow from Hamburg to Erie. Problems on the New York Thruway, starting around Syracuse and Rochester westward. Most of the problems with the Lake Huron snow belt, those are confined to Canada, from around Goderich up to the area east of Georgian Bay. The Lake Michigan snow belt affecting western Michigan. They're looking for 5 to 9 inches from Holland and Muskegon to Mackinac Bridge. Winter weather advisories further inland. And of course, the South Shore Lake effect snows around Lake Superior. We could see up to 2 to 3 feet in some areas, mostly between Ironwood and the Porkies. Most areas, however, getting about 6 to 12 inches. We can take a quick look at how the temperatures have been doing this season. There's Chicago from early October through November and into December. Temperatures running mostly above normal. This brown band indicates the normal temperatures. So early in November, quite warm, and then a cool down around Thanksgiving. Here is Cincinnati, very similar trend right there. Very warm autumn, and then going below normal after Thanksgiving. Even Buffalo, pretty close to normals, some very warm weather back around Halloween. And for New York City, pretty close to typical temperatures, probably one of the only normal areas of the country. Quite cold over the past week, but they're getting that little warm surge in advance of this next big weather system. In the southeastern U.S., starting to pick up that dry slot through the Carolinas into Georgia. There are some high winds with that, and that prompted wind advisories from central South Carolina into Georgia, including Atlanta. northwest winds gusting to 40 miles an hour today, and those should die off this evening. Highs ranged from the 40s in the Appalachians to the 70s and 80s in Florida. Here's a quick look at the season in Georgia. Looks pretty close to normals throughout much of the fall. There's that cold snap around Thanksgiving into early December. And in Miami, it started out quite warm in late October and early December, and then trended more towards seasonal normals going into late November. In the southern plains, a gradual warm-up as that high begins moving off to the east. Temperatures today rose into the 60s in much of Texas, but remained in the 50s in Oklahoma. In Dallas-Fort Worth, above normal. In fact, you can see very few days where the lows went below normal temperatures, just maybe 8 or 9 days right there in late November. And a very similar situation at Oklahoma City, above normal, and then returning to normal conditions for the very last week of November. In the northern plains, very cold conditions, and this is evidence of blowing snow. You can see these convective cloud streets, very cold temperatures with extremely cold temperatures just off the surface. And this afternoon we were looking for highs below zero from Grand Rapids to Fergus Falls and Fargo, Devil's Lake. Elsewhere, highs ranged from 14 at Minneapolis to 7 at Bismarck. Further south, highs around Chicago, 31. And in Denver, 52. Colorado just not getting much of that Canadian air this season. And then looking at Denver, very warm in October, progressing to a mild autumn through November. In Grand Forks, we do have a few viewers there, and you can see those very cold conditions, November 29th to November 30th, -5 for a low, 8 degrees for a high, and they're going right back into the icebox. In the southwestern U.S., mild conditions. Up near the top, we can see some mountain wave activity in Wyoming due to that southern stream jet coming in from the Pacific. Highs today ranged from about 42 at Salt Lake City to 53 at Reno and into the low 70s in the southwest deserts. The Santa Ana wind event has finally subsided. Red flag warning continues until this evening for the San Gabriel Mountains and the San Fernando Valley out to Malibu and Oxnard. Winds will be subsiding over the next few hours. Persistent Tule fog in the southern San Joaquin Valley starting to burn off this afternoon. That prompted a dense fog warning earlier this morning. Or is that a dense fog advisory? I'll have to check on that. Anyway, we're going to get a break on that fog tonight due to the approach of that next system, and then the fog will be back later this week. Winter weather advisory for the central and northern Sierras, including Lake Tahoe, from 10 p.m. tonight until Thursday afternoon, looking for 5 to 12 inches above 5,000 feet. Looking at Phoenix, a very hot start to October. That's when we had those temperatures up to 113. In fact, let me double check that. Yeah, 113 on October 6th. They finally broke out of that pattern on October 28th. And then we trended more towards normal conditions, and then it started to go warm for late November. At Los Angeles, however, a little bit on the cool side throughout much of the autumn period. Then shifting to the northwestern U.S., not much to see, although we can definitely pick out that mountain wave activity there along the Rockies. We have an air stagnation advisory continuing in the Harney Basin out towards the Snake River Valley, including Boise and Ontario through tomorrow afternoon. Winter weather advisory issued for the Pendleton area for mixed precip with a light accumulation of ice over the next 24 hours. Conditions in Portland, pretty close to seasonal normals. Then at Boise in the interior region, yeah, this looks pretty close to normal as well. So that concludes our look at the lower 48. One thing I failed to point out was the very strong temperature contrast between the high plains, 40s from Billings up to Great Falls, contrasting with temperatures near zero in North Dakota. So that emphasizes that cold air just not making it very far to the southwest. Then we focus on the Pacific, and it is stormy once again. Checking out Alaska, some very mild conditions. Starting to see 40s along the south coast, 40s around the Anchorage area. And I would probably call that mild around Fairbanks, temperatures in the 20s. Even on the North Slope, very warm. And they do have a very large area of blizzard warnings all along the north coast, this entire area. That's due to high winds out of the northeast, gusting to 65 miles an hour with extensive blowing snow. Then we check out Canada, very cold conditions. As we mentioned, sub-zero all the way to the prairies. Not very much westward extent. Temperatures running near freezing in southern British Columbia into Calgary and Edmonton. We have extreme cold warnings from Environment Canada across much of the prairies for northern Saskatchewan, southeast Saskatchewan, southern Manitoba, including Winnipeg, and the Dryden Kenora area. Wind chills could be down to minus 40, with overnight lows down to minus 30 Celsius. And then just a very quick look at eastern Canada. We actually have rain warnings around the St. Lawrence River Valley, including Quebec City and Montreal. They're looking for 1 to 2 inches of rain that could cause extensive flooding from snowmelt. Then going into Thursday and Friday, that will be replaced with cold air and flash freeze conditions. And let's take a look at that forecast. Here's where we're at right now. Rain exiting the northeastern U.S., being replaced by snow. Into the overnight hours, it's going to be bitterly cold. Highs tomorrow in Grand Forks and northern Minnesota will remain below zero. Cold air spreads into the Midwest, looking for a high of 14 at Chicago, 17 at Des Moines. But that cold air just not pushing very far south at all. We're going to find 50s and 60s further south with a low-level jet running from Texas to Missouri. In the western U.S., continued mild. Highs in the 30s and 40s in the Great Basin area to the low 70s in the deserts. Pacific system moves into Texas for Friday. Due to the extensive warm advection, we're going to be seeing rain all the way up towards Des Moines and Omaha. Possibly some freezing rain further to the north. Then we go into Saturday. Here comes this strong Pacific system moving into the Bay Area, into Sacramento, San Jose, and Stockton. Could be some very high winds with that, up to 50 to 60 mile-an-hour gusts. And there could be the potential for convective rains on the coastal ranges, maybe even a little bit of thunder. Then we go into Sunday, a very warm pattern in the eastern U.S. due to that extensive warm advection. And as we showed you on the upper air charts, there's just not much northwesterly flow coming in for this weekend. So this will be dominated by Pacific weather. Very warm nationwide for Sunday into Monday. Rains from the Appalachians up to Cleveland and Pittsburgh. Possibly snow up there in northern New York. And then another cold blast coming down through the Central Plains around midweek, and snows all the way from Wichita, St. Louis, up to Indianapolis and Cleveland. And more lake effect snow possible for next Friday, December 20th. And here's a quick look at the Arctic air situation. The colors represent temperature, so the aqua and oranges are what we're going to be concerned with. So we do have some minus 30 to minus 40s up there in the high Arctic, in Yukon, towards the extended period around Friday. Just not sure if that's going to come south. So not really seeing much push on that, and the pressures up there are rather modest, 1024 millibars. And that's all I've got for this edition of Forecast Lab. Again, this program is not possible without our Patreon supporters, and I want to thank Glenn, Nathan LaFrance, and Joseph Fulton for stepping up to the plate and providing that contribution we need to keep the program going. So thank you very much. And of course, if you're a Patreon supporter, that opens up Monday, and you get the private supporter video. So keep that in mind. All right, we'll see you back here again for the Friday edition. Hope you have a great middle of your week, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.